I am Arya, and I never believed in love at first sight until the day I met him. It was one of those ordinary mornings when the sunlight fell softly through the cafe windows, painting the room in warm gold. And yet something about that day felt different. He walked in like he owned the air around him, but in the most subtle, unassuming way. His smile was quiet, almost shy, but it carried a weight I couldn't explain. From the moment our eyes met, I felt a pull, a connection so sudden, so intense, that it scared me. It was as if I had known him before, in some life I couldn't remember. I didn't know it then, but that fleeting moment would change everything. I remember every detail of our first conversation. He asked about my favorite book, and somehow the way he listened made me feel like I was the only person in the world. His voice had this calm, soothing rhythm, and I found myself spilling parts of my heart I had kept hidden from everyone else. It felt effortless, natural, like two puzzle pieces finally snapping together after years of searching. I laughed more freely than I had in months, and when he laughed, it felt like a song I didn't want to end. There was something about him, something that went beyond the surface. I didn't just like him, I felt understood by him, seen in ways no one else had ever seen me. Days turned into weeks, and our connection deepened. Texts turned into calls turned into long, late-night walks, and every moment we shared added another layer to this fragile, thrilling bond. I found myself thinking about him constantly, imagining a future I wasn't supposed to imagine yet. There was excitement in every encounter, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. He was kind, thoughtful, and full of these small, unexpected gestures that made my heart swell. A coffee brought just the way I liked it. A note left in my bag that made me smile without reason. A glance that lingered just long enough to make my stomach flutter. Every moment with him was a story I wanted to live over and over again. But as the days went by, the little inconsistencies began to poke at the edges of my happiness. A text delayed for hours, an answer that seemed carefully measured, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes sometimes. At first, I brushed it off, convincing myself it was nothing. I wanted to believe in this love so badly that I ignored the tiny alarms ringing in my mind. Yet, there was a growing sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Love, I realized, wasn't just about butterflies and perfect moments. It was about trust, about truth. And somehow, a part of the truth was missing from him. Then came the day that shattered the fragile world I had built around him. I was scrolling through social media, innocently enough, looking at a friend's post, when I saw him. Not just him, but her, standing beside him in a photo that made my heart drop so hard it felt like it would break my chest. She smiled at the camera, leaning close to him, their hands intertwined in a way I had never imagined anyone could. The caption read a date, a celebration, a life I had no part of. I blinked, staring at the screen, my fingers trembling as I refreshed it, convinced I was seeing things. But it was real. He was married. I don't think I've ever felt such a mix of disbelief and heartbreak all at once. My mind raced with questions I didn't want the answers to. How could he have hidden this from me? Was everything he said a lie? Did he ever care about me? Or was I just a fleeting distraction in a life that already belonged to someone else? The world seemed to tilt beneath me, and suddenly, all the moments we shared, the laughter, the late-night talks, the promises I had imagined, felt like cruel illusions. I wanted to scream, to confront him, to demand answers, but I also felt paralyzed, stuck in a limbo of confusion and sorrow. I replayed every conversation, every smile, every touch, trying to find a clue I might have missed. And yet, there was nothing that could have warned me. He had been careful, meticulous even, in crafting the version of himself that I fell in love with. And now, confronted with the truth, I didn't know whether to feel angry, betrayed, or heartbroken. I just knew the image I had of us, the future I had dreamed of, was gone, shattered. But even in the pain, there was a part of me that clung to hope, irrational as it was. I needed to understand. I needed to hear it from him, to see the truth in his eyes, to know why. Was it a mistake? A lie? something more complicated than I could grasp. And so, I found myself standing at a crossroads, torn between confronting him and protecting what little of my heart remained. I knew that whatever choice I made next could change everything, could either break me completely or give me the answers I so desperately needed. As I waited, my mind wandered to the moments that had seemed so real, so authentic. Was it possible that some part of our connection had been genuine? Could someone truly care for another while hiding a life-altering secret? The questions swirled endlessly, and each one felt heavier than the last. My heart ached with longing and fear, and I realized that love could be beautiful and cruel at the same time. I had fallen for someone who was, in so many ways, perfect, but unreachable, unattainable, and hidden behind a wall I hadn't even known existed. I didn't know how this story would end. Would I confront him and demand the truth, risking everything I had felt for him? Or would I walk away, protecting myself from a heartbreak too immense to bear? The uncertainty was unbearable, a weight pressing down on me with every heartbeat. I had no choice but to follow the path laid out before me, even if it led to pain, even if it led to heartbreak. Because some truths, no matter how devastating, demand to be faced. And so here I am, caught between love and betrayal, hope and despair, wondering if the person I believed was my soulmate was ever truly mine to begin with. The next steps I take could change everything, and I can feel the tension in the air, the storm gathering just beyond the horizon. What will happen when I finally confront him? Will he explain, apologize, or shatter my world even further? I don't know yet, but I do know one thing. My life as I knew it has been irrevocably altered, and nothing will ever feel the same again. As I take a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands, I know the story isn't over. In fact, it's only just beginning. And the truth I'm about to uncover, it's going to break me in ways I never imagined. I couldn't stop thinking about the photo, about the life he had built that I had no part of. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, his hand in hers, the ease between them that I had longed for so desperately. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. How could someone who seemed so honest and caring hide something so monumental? It wasn't just a lie, it was a life carefully concealed, a reality I hadn't even suspected existed. The thought twisted inside me, making every heartbeat painful and every breath heavy. I tried to remember the early days, the first conversations that had made me feel like I had found someone special. Were they all lies, or had there been some truth buried underneath the deception? The uncertainty gnawed at me, leaving me restless and sleepless. I began replaying every word, every gesture, searching for signs I might have missed. There were moments, small, almost invisible, that I now saw differently. A hesitation before he answered a question, a glance at his phone that lingered too long, a vague mention of family obligations that never fully added up. I had laughed them off before, told myself I was reading too much into things, but now they felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. I started asking friends if they had noticed anything unusual about him, anything I might have missed. They all said the same thing. He seemed kind, attentive, and genuinely interested in me. No one had suspected. No one had warned me. That made it worse somehow, like the world was hiding the truth from me too. I felt alone, trapped in a reality I hadn't chosen, trying to make sense of a man who had become everything to me, yet whose life was off limits in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Then came the memories that cut the deepest, the quiet evenings we had spent walking through the city, our conversations stretching into the night, the way he had held my hand as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I remembered the first time I realized I was falling for him, how my chest had tightened every time he smiled, how my mind had raced imagining a life together. And now, all of it felt like a cruel trick, a story written for someone else while I had been cast in the role of an unwitting observer. I found myself questioning everything about him. Who was he really? What had he been hiding behind those warm eyes and gentle voice? There were still pieces I didn't understand, small details that didn't add up. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that uncovering the truth wouldn't be simple. It wasn't just about confronting him, it was about understanding the man behind the lies, the choices he had made, and the consequences of those choices for everyone involved, including me. The days that followed were a blur of emotion. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to demand answers and see the truth in his eyes. But another part of me, the part that still cared, feared what I might discover. What if the explanation was something I couldn't accept? What if the love I had felt, the trust I had given so freely, was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion? I was terrified of the answers, yet I knew I couldn't live in ignorance forever. The tension inside me built like a storm, unpredictable and relentless, leaving me restless at night and on edge during the day. I began noticing little things around me that reminded me of him. A cafe where we had shared our first coffee together, the park bench where he had kissed my hand, the quiet corners of the city where our laughter had echoed. Each memory brought a rush of warmth and an equal wave of sorrow. It was impossible to separate the joy from the heartbreak, and I realized that part of me still clung to him, still wanted him in my life even though I knew I couldn't have him fully. I decided I needed to understand more about the woman in the photo, the one who had unknowingly stolen my place in his life. I searched for information online, scrolling through posts, profiles, and photos, trying to piece together the story that had been hidden from me. Every detail I discovered added to the complexity of the situation. They had been together for years, their life carefully documented online in ways I had never imagined. I saw family gatherings, shared vacations, celebrations that I had no part of, moments that had shaped the man I loved but would never truly belong to me. It hurt more than I could describe. The more I learned, the more impossible it seemed to reconcile the man I knew with the life he had hidden. And yet, there were still contradictions, moments where his public life didn't fully match the image I had seen in the photo. I began wondering if there was more to the story than I could see. Questions about his choices, his motivations, and the secrets he carried. Each new discovery was like peeling back a layer of a mystery, revealing a deeper, darker complexity that left me both intrigued and terrified. Even as I tried to focus on my own life, I couldn't escape him. His presence lingered in my mind, in the spaces we had shared, in the emotions I couldn't let go of. Friends suggested I move on, to stop looking for answers and protect my heart. But I couldn't. Not yet. There was too much I didn't understand, too much I needed to uncover before I could find closure. I had fallen for him with everything I had, and the truth, whatever it was, deserved to be faced, no matter how painful. The nights became the hardest. Alone in my apartment, the silence felt heavier than ever. I thought about the conversations we would have, the questions I needed to ask, and the moment when I would finally confront him. My heart raced with anticipation and fear. What would he say? How would he explain? And most importantly, how could I ever trust him again, if that was even possible? The uncertainty was suffocating, and I realized that the story of us was far from over. It was just entering a phase of deeper, more complicated truths that I had yet to unravel. I knew that when I finally did face him, everything would change. There would be no going back to the way things were. The innocence of my feelings, the simplicity of my hope, all of it would be gone. And yet, part of me couldn't help but cling to the possibility that there was a reason, a justification, a truth that could make sense of the heartbreak. I wanted to believe in him, in the man I had loved so completely, even as the evidence around me suggested otherwise. As I sat there, thinking about the life he had hidden, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. Anger, betrayal, longing, confusion, hope. They all swirled together in a storm that left me dizzy and exhausted. I didn't know what the next day would bring, but I knew one thing. The story wasn't over, and the next chapter could change everything. I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Even now, as I write down my thoughts and try to make sense of it all, I can feel the tension building, a storm waiting to break. The questions haunt me. How could someone I trusted so deeply hide a life like this? Was there ever a time when he truly cared for me, or was it all an illusion? And most importantly, when I finally confront him, will I find the answers I crave, or will I be left shattered beyond repair? I can't stop thinking about the day I'll see him again, the moment I'll have to face the truth. The confrontation I know is inevitable, and though my heart trembles at the thought, I also feel a strange sense of determination. I will know the truth. I will uncover the story behind the man I loved, even if it breaks me in the process. Because some secrets, no matter how painful, demand to be revealed, and some truths, no matter how devastating, cannot remain hidden forever. I couldn't stop replaying the moment I had seen the photo in my mind. It was like a broken loop, spinning endlessly, twisting my thoughts into knots I couldn't untangle. Every memory of him now carried a shadow, a silent question that no answer had yet touched. And yet, even in the midst of this heartbreak, there was a part of me that refused to let go. I wanted to understand him, to uncover the why behind everything. It was a need more intense than fear, more desperate than sadness, a compulsion to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. I started noticing the little contradictions that had always existed, but now took on a new meaning. The times he had disappeared without explanation, the subtle discomfort when certain topics came up, even the way he sometimes seemed distant while we were together. Before, I had brushed it off, called it stress, a busy schedule, or overthinking on my part. But now, with the knowledge of the life he had hidden, each small inconsistency felt like a clue left behind, a sign I'd been too blind to see. I couldn't help but wonder about the woman in the photo. Who was she? What did she mean to him? I had tried to keep my curiosity from consuming me, but it was impossible. Every online search, every social media post, every subtle hint of his public life became an obsession. I found myself comparing our conversations, the affection he had shown me, to the life he shared with her. The contrast was painful and confusing, like staring at two different versions of the same person. How could someone be so loving and attentive in one context, and yet live a life completely separate from that care? Then there were the whispers of doubt from the people around me. Friends and family noticed my mood shifting, my distracted smiles, the way I would flinch at certain words or names. They asked questions I wasn't ready to answer, their concern both comforting and suffocating. I wanted to confide in them, to spill out all the pieces of this puzzle I had been assembling alone, but the shame of being deceived, of having my heart manipulated, held me back. I feared judgment, yes, but also the realization that, in a way, I had fallen for a version of him that didn't truly exist. One evening, I found myself back at the cafe where we had first met. The sunlight streamed through the windows in the same way, the tables and chairs worn with quiet familiarity. I could almost feel his presence in the air, like an echo of a moment that was no longer mine. I sat there for hours, sipping coffee I didn't taste, watching the world move around me while I stayed frozen in my own thoughts. I kept imagining him walking in, smiling at me, and I felt a pang of longing so sharp it made my chest ache. Then I imagined the other life, the one in the photo, and my heart broke all over again. I began to notice patterns, small signs that hinted at the complexity of his life. There were messages I hadn't understood, meetings he hadn't explained, moments when his phone would light up with names I didn't recognize. All of it painted a picture of a man living in multiple worlds, a reality where I was only a fragment, a story that existed outside the truth he had committed to. And in that realization, a new conflict emerged, one that went beyond betrayal. I wanted him. I needed him. Yet I knew that what I wanted might never be mine. As the days passed, I became aware of how deeply my emotions were entangled with his. I found myself walking the same streets we had walked together, replaying conversations, imagining the weight of his gaze, the touch of his hand. And yet, I also began noticing the life that existed without me, the celebrations, the shared laughter, the family moments that I wasn't part of. It was like living in two different realities at once, one filled with longing and desire, the other with an undeniable truth I couldn't ignore. Then came the moment when I realized this conflict was not just about him, but about me as well. I was caught between the past and the present, between my heart's desire and my mind's understanding. Every decision felt like a risk, every thought a battle. I began to see that the tension wasn't just external, it was internal, a war within me between love and reason, hope and reality. I didn't know if I was strong enough to confront him, to ask the questions that had been burning in my mind, or if I would collapse under the weight of what I might learn. Meanwhile, subtle connections began to form around me, threads that hinted at something larger than my personal heartbreak. Friends who had known me for years began to notice patterns, small coincidences that even I hadn't connected. They shared stories, observations, warnings. Some tried to comfort me, others tried to protect me, and a few even suggested that perhaps there was more to the man I loved than met the eye. I realized that the mystery wasn't confined to my experience. It had layers, perspectives I hadn't considered, truths that might exist beyond what I could see. There was a new subplot forming, one that involved the people closest to me. My best friend, sensing my distress, pushed me to investigate, to uncover the truth even if it hurt. Another friend, more cautious, urged me to step back, to protect my heart, to avoid the danger of getting caught in a web of lies that might consume me. Each perspective added complexity to my journey, each opinion a new angle I had to weigh. And all the while, I knew the central conflict between the man I loved and the life he had hidden remained unresolved, a storm that could break at any moment. Late one night, I found myself walking through the city streets, feeling the tension tighten in my chest. The lights of the buildings flickered like distant stars, the hum of traffic echoing in the quiet, and I imagined him somewhere out there, living a life that existed without me. I thought about the confrontation I knew was coming, the questions I would have to ask, and the answers I might not be ready for. The suspense was unbearable, a quiet hum in the background of my thoughts, a constant reminder that the story was far from over. Even as I navigated my own emotions, I couldn't ignore the ripple effect of his actions. My relationships, my sense of self, my trust in the people I loved, all of it had shifted in ways I couldn't fully understand. The betrayal, the secrecy, the hidden life. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything I thought I knew, everything I had believed about love and trust. And in that realization, the story expanded beyond a single heartbreak, revealing layers of conflict that I hadn't anticipated. I knew the next steps I took would shape the outcome of everything. Every decision, every action, every choice to dig deeper or to hold back carried weight. And though the fear was overwhelming, I also felt a strange determination, a pull toward the truth that was impossible to resist. I had come too far to turn back now, too far to let the uncertainty linger without confronting it. The storm was gathering, the tension was mounting, and I could feel the moment of revelation drawing closer, though I had no idea what form it would take. As I continued to think, I realized the conflict wasn't just about love, not just about betrayal. It was about identity, about understanding the people we trust, about seeing the truth even when it shatters the world we've built. And in that realization, I felt both fear and clarity. The story wasn't just about him or me, it was about the choices we make, the secrets we keep, and the lives that intersect in ways we never fully comprehend. The night deepened around me, and I felt the weight of the unresolved tension pressing against my chest. I knew that in the coming days, I would have to make choices that could change everything. I would have to navigate a labyrinth of emotions, lies, and hidden truths, and I would have to do it alone. The suspense of what was to come was unbearable, and yet it was the only path forward. Whatever happened next, I knew my life would never be the same. The story was far from over, and the conflict was only growing stronger. This section expands the main conflict, develops subplots, explores multiple perspectives, and continues building suspense, leaving the audience on edge without resolving the tension. I can continue the next section, diving even deeper into the confrontation, twists, and emotional escalation, keeping it YouTube-ready, human-centric, and suspenseful. The days dragged on like a slow, cruel dream. Every time I thought I had a moment of clarity, something pulled me back into the storm of uncertainty. My mind couldn't stop circling the same questions. How could someone I trusted so completely live a life that excluded me? What had I meant to him? And more terrifying than anything else, what would happen when I finally confronted him? The suspense was suffocating, and I felt it in every beat of my heart. I kept trying to distract myself, throwing myself into work, into friends, into anything that could pull me away from the gnawing emptiness inside. But nothing worked. Every familiar street corner, every cafe, every tiny detail of the city reminded me of him, of us, and of the life that I'd believed we might share. It was like living in two worlds at once, the one I had imagined, filled with hope and possibility, and the one I had been forced to confront, filled with hidden truths and impossible questions. Then came the messages. Small, seemingly innocent messages that ignited the fire inside me again. A notification on my phone, a text from him, and suddenly all the uncertainty and pain surged forward. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, unable to bring myself to open it. What if it was casual, indifferent, like nothing had changed? Or worse, what if it was deliberate, meant to pull me back without giving me any answers? My hands shook as I finally tapped on the message, and the words I read made my chest tighten even further. He was asking to meet. My mind reeled. Meet? After everything I had discovered, after the photo, the hidden life, the heartbreak, why now? Why had he reached out? And what would I say when I saw him? The questions tumbled over each other, impossible to sort, impossible to silence. And yet, a small, stubborn part of me wanted to go, wanted to see him, wanted to finally hear the truth from his own lips. I could feel the tension building, the anticipation thickening like a storm cloud ready to break. The night of the meeting came, and I could barely sleep. Every sound in my apartment made me jump. Every shadow seemed to shift with hidden meaning. I kept imagining every possible scenario. An apology, an explanation, a confession, or the worst, the confirmation that I had been nothing more than a distraction. My heart pounded in my chest as I dressed, my hands trembling as I tried to steady my breathing. I felt like I was walking into the eye of a hurricane, and I didn't know if I would come out whole. When I arrived at the cafe, it was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that made every sound echo too loudly. I spotted him immediately, sitting at the same corner table where we had shared our first coffee, the light catching the edges of his face in a way that made my heart ache. He looked different somehow. Serious, guarded, a shadow of the warmth I had fallen for. My chest tightened, and I almost turned around, almost ran away, but something stronger than fear held me in place. I had to know. I had to face the truth. He stood as I approached, and for a brief moment we just looked at each other, two worlds colliding in silence. There was so much unsaid, so much tension that it felt almost physical, like the air between us had thickened. My hands were shaking, my heart hammering, and yet I forced myself to sit, to face him, to finally confront the questions that had haunted me for weeks. He smiled, just barely, but it didn't reach his eyes, and that small detail was enough to make my stomach churn. I started with the basics. I asked about the photo, about her, about the life I had seen online. He hesitated, his eyes flickering away for a moment, and I felt a cold pit open in my stomach. Then he began to speak, his voice low, cautious, and measured. There were truths in his words, but there were also gaps, explanations that didn't quite fit, confessions that raised more questions than they answered. I wanted to listen, to understand, but every sentence seemed to deepen the labyrinth of emotions I was trapped in. As the conversation continued, I noticed something else. How carefully he navigated the story, how much he revealed, and how much he still left hidden. The tension was unbearable, a tight coil of dread and anticipation that made every breath a struggle. I realized that whatever happened next, nothing would be the same. I could feel the climax of this confrontation building, like a wave gathering force before it crashes, and I didn't know if I would survive the impact. Around us, the cafe seemed to fade, the sounds of the city becoming distant, irrelevant. It was just the two of us. The history, the heartbreak, the secrets, and the unbearable weight of everything left unsaid. I wanted to demand the truth, to tear the walls down, but I was also afraid of what I might find. The suspense was almost unbearable. Every glance, every pause, every word seemed loaded with meaning, and yet the full story remained just out of reach. I realized in that moment how much I had changed in the weeks since discovering the truth. I was no longer the same person who had walked into his life full of hope and trust. I was wary, alert, tuned into every subtle movement and word, reading for signs, for meaning, for honesty that I didn't know if I could trust. And yet, even with all that caution, a part of me still longed for him, still clung to the version of him I had loved. The contradiction within me was unbearable, the suspense almost physical. The conversation reached a point where silence fell between us. It wasn't peaceful. It was tense, electric, heavy with the weight of everything unresolved. I could feel my pulse in my temples, the ache of longing mixed with the sting of betrayal, the fear of what was to come. Every fiber of my being was alert, waiting for him to speak, to reveal the secret that had haunted me for weeks, to answer the questions that had been clawing at my heart. And yet, the words didn't come. The suspense stretched, unbearable and raw, until I felt like I might shatter under it. I knew in that moment that the climax was coming. The truth was about to be revealed. But not yet. Not fully. The tension between us was a living thing, pulsing, waiting for the moment it would explode. And I also knew, deep in my bones, that whatever happened next could change everything, could either shatter my heart completely or give me the answers I had been searching for. The uncertainty was the cruelest part, the part that made every second stretch like an eternity, leaving me both terrified and desperate for resolution. I could feel my hands trembling, my chest tight, my mind racing with possibilities. He looked at me, his expression unreadable, and I realized that the next words, the next revelation, could break me in ways I couldn't imagine. The suspense was at its peak, the tension unbearable, and the story had reached the point where nothing could remain the same. Everything depended on what would be said next, on the choices we made in the moments to come, and on the truths that had yet to be revealed. And then, just as I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, he paused. The weight of that pause, the anticipation, the uncertainty, it was almost more than I could bear. My heart hammered, my breath caught in my throat, and I realized that the climax, the moment I had been waiting for, was right there, hanging in the air, electric and terrifying. The story, my story, was on the edge of a precipice, and one small word, one small revelation, could send it crashing into a place from which nothing could return. This section builds maximum suspense and tension, intensifies the emotional stakes, explores the internal and external conflicts, and positions the story right at the edge of the climax without resolving it. The audience is left fully on edge, anticipating the next revelation. I can continue with the next part, where the climax begins to unfold while keeping the suspense and twists high, ensuring it's fully YouTube-ready and human-centric. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of thoughts in my mind. The cafe around us seemed to fade, leaving just the two of us and the tension that hummed in the air like electricity. I had expected answers, a confession, an apology, or even the cruel confirmation of my worst fears. But what came next was something I hadn't seen coming. His phone buzzed and he glanced at it. A flicker of something. Was it fear? Surprise? Crossing his face before he quickly locked the screen and set it down. That tiny movement sent a shiver down my spine. Something was being hidden, and I was about to discover it. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the table, and for a moment, I thought he was finally going to speak. Instead, he said something that made my stomach drop. There's something else you don't know," he whispered, his voice low, almost unsteady. My heart stopped. I wanted to demand he explain, to force him to give me the truth immediately, but something in his tone made me hesitate. There was fear in his eyes, a hesitation that suggested the revelation was more dangerous or more complicated than I could imagine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt my hands trembling on the table, gripping the edge as if it could hold me together. He looked down, as if gathering courage, and then finally met my eyes again. "I didn't just hide my marriage," he said slowly. I didn't tell you the truth about why I'm here." The words hit me like a punch. I stared at him, unable to process the sentence. What could be worse than the betrayal of a hidden life? What secret could he possibly be keeping that was even bigger than this? My mind raced, imagining every possible scenario, each more terrifying than the last. My chest ached, my throat tightened, and I realized that the conflict I had been living through for weeks was about to explode in ways I hadn't prepared for. He continued, his words deliberate but heavy with hesitation. The life you saw, the marriage, the photo, it's complicated. But there's someone else involved, someone who doesn't even know about us, and it's not just about feelings anymore. It's about choices that affect more than just you and me. My head spun. I tried to make sense of it, tried to catch the thread of what he was saying, but the ambiguity only made my heart race faster. The suspense was unbearable. Before I could respond, he pulled a small envelope from his jacket pocket. I froze, staring at it, unsure if I wanted to take it or throw it away. "You need to see this," he said, placing it gently on the table between us. My fingers hovered over it, trembling. I could feel my pulse in my ears, the anticipation almost unbearable. I had no idea what was inside, but I knew that opening it would change everything. And yet, not opening it left me trapped in the unknown, stuck in a suspense that was slowly crushing me. With a shaky breath, I tore the envelope open. Inside was a series of photographs, images I hadn't expected, images that made my heart freeze. They weren't of him with his wife. They were of him with someone else entirely, someone whose existence I had never imagined, someone young, someone connected to a situation far more complicated than just love or betrayal. My mind reeled. Who was she? What did she have to do with us? And why had he hidden her from me all along? He watched me, his eyes heavy, waiting for my reaction. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to throw the evidence across the room, but I couldn't. My body felt frozen, my emotions a tangled storm of fear, confusion, and disbelief. The conflict had escalated beyond anything I had prepared for. This wasn't just about a hidden marriage anymore. It was about a secret that threatened to unravel everything I had believed about him, about us, about love. "You see," he said quietly, "I wanted to tell you. I tried, but I couldn't. The situation is complicated, and if I tell you everything now, it could change everything. For you, for me, for everyone involved. But I couldn't let you walk away without knowing at least part of the truth." My hands shook as I held the photographs, my mind spinning. The tension in the air was unbearable, thicker than anything I had felt before. And I realized that the climax I had been approaching wasn't just emotional, it was dangerous in ways I hadn't imagined. I looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of honesty, but it was a puzzle. Was he truly being sincere? Or was this another layer of deception? Every instinct told me to distrust him, yet every fiber of my heart screamed that I needed to know the truth. And the suspense, the anticipation of what would come next, was almost too much to bear. My pulse raced, my stomach twisted, and I realized that the story had reached a point of no return. Even as I processed the revelation, I began to notice subtle signs around us. The way the cafe seemed quieter than usual, the distant sounds of people moving outside, the faint shadows in the corners. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. And I knew that whatever happened next would determine the outcome of everything. The trust, the love, the heartbreak, the secrets. The stakes had never been higher. He leaned closer, lowering his voice almost to a whisper. "There are choices that need to be made," he said, "and time is running out. I didn't want you to be hurt, but now you have to decide if you're willing to face the whole truth. Because once you see it, there's no turning back." I could feel my heart hammering against my chest, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The suspense was suffocating. The main conflict, the betrayal, the hidden life, the secrets, had escalated beyond anything I could have anticipated, and the second plot twist had thrown everything into chaos. I looked at him, at the photographs, at the weight of the secret he carried. My mind raced with questions, none of which had answers yet. The story wasn't just about love or heartbreak anymore. It was about choices, consequences, and the tangled web of truth and deception that bound us together. and I realized that the climax was approaching, the moment when everything would come to a head. But not yet. Not until I had faced the final pieces of this puzzle, the truths he had hidden, and the decisions I would be forced to make. The suspense stretched, almost unbearable, the tension crackling in the air like a live wire. My hands trembled as I held the photographs, my chest tight, my mind spinning with possibilities. The second twist had escalated the stakes, turned the conflict inward and outward at the same time, and left me teetering on the edge of a revelation that could shatter everything. And in that moment, I understood that the story wasn't just about heartbreak or betrayal. It was about survival, about truth, and about confronting the impossible. The room seemed to shrink around me, the sounds fading, the world narrowing to the weight of the secret, the suspense of the unknown, and the tension that pulsed like a living thing between us. I could feel the climax drawing closer, a storm ready to crash, but I wasn't ready, not yet. And yet, I knew I had no choice. I had to face it. I had to confront the full story, even if it broke me in ways I couldn't imagine. And in that quiet, suspended moment, I realized the truth. The story wasn't over, the conflicts weren't resolved, and the next step would change everything. The second twist had arrived, and with it, a new level of suspense that left me both terrified and desperate for answers. The climax was approaching, and I was on the edge, staring into a storm I couldn't escape. I stared at him across the table, the photographs trembling in my hands, my chest tight with anticipation and fear. The truth, whatever it was, hung in the air between us like a heavy curtain waiting to be pulled back. I could see the weight of it in his eyes, the guilt, the fear, the desperation. And I realized that there was no turning back now. The confrontation I had feared, that had haunted me for weeks, was finally here. He took a deep breath and began to explain. His voice was quiet but steady, each word deliberate. The woman in the photos, she's my sister's best friend. I've been helping her through something dangerous, something she couldn't tell anyone. The marriage you saw, it's not what it seems. She needed protection, and I had to pretend in order to keep her safe. Everything I hid from you wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I had to protect someone else. I blinked, trying to process his words. The confusion that had gnawed at me was replaced by a strange mix of relief and new tension. Relief that his life wasn't a simple betrayal, that there was a reason behind the secrecy. But tension because it was still complicated, still layered with hidden truths I didn't fully understand. My emotions surged, anger, sorrow, love, and a lingering distrust, all tangled together, impossible to separate. He leaned closer, his gaze locked onto mine. I didn't want you to get hurt. I tried to step away to keep my distance, but I couldn't because I care about you too much. Everything I did, every secret I kept, it was for protection, not deception. But now, you have the right to know the truth, and I can't keep holding back. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. The suspense that had built for weeks had finally peaked, and I realized I was standing on the edge of the story, the climax of our tangled lives. Slowly, carefully, he explained the details I had been missing. The threats, the danger, the reasons he had to live this double life. Each revelation was a shock, a mix of fear and understanding that left me reeling. And yet, despite the intensity of his confession, there was honesty in his words, a vulnerability I had never seen before. I could feel the tension begin to shift, the storm slowly settling as the full scope of the truth came into focus. Tears pricked my eyes, and I struggled to speak. So, it wasn't about her, I whispered. It wasn't about a life you wanted to hide from me because you loved her instead? He shook his head, his expression earnest. No, it was never about love for anyone else. It was about protection. And yes, it was wrong not to tell you, but I couldn't risk putting you in danger. Or her. The weight of his words sank in, and I realized that the heartbreak I had felt wasn't betrayal in the way I had imagined. It was a necessary deception, one that had been designed to keep multiple people safe. My emotions twisted between relief and lingering pain, but there was clarity now, a resolution to the conflict that had consumed me. I took a deep breath, letting the truth settle in. The suspense had reached its peak, and yet the intensity of what I was feeling made me realize the story wasn't just about him. It was about me, about trust, about understanding that love sometimes comes with impossible choices. The main conflict was resolved, the hidden life explained, the heartbreak transformed into understanding. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm, fragile but undeniable. Then, just as I thought the storm had passed, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope, similar to the one I had opened earlier. My heart skipped a beat. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice low and tense. "Something I didn't know how to tell you, because I wasn't sure if it was real. But now, you need to know." I hesitated, but curiosity overpowered fear. I opened the envelope and found a single photograph. This one of me, smiling at a place I didn't recognize, standing next to someone I didn't know. My eyes widened. I don't understand," I whispered. He swallowed hard. "That's you, taken weeks ago at a place you visited once, a park. But the thing is, someone has been watching you. I don't know who or why, but it's connected to everything I've been protecting. You weren't in danger before, but now you might be." The room felt colder, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me like a physical force. The calm I had felt seconds before vanished, replaced by a new tension, sharper and more terrifying than anything before. The main conflicts had been resolved. Yes, but this final twist, this new unknown, promised that the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He looked at me, eyes serious, almost pleading. "I had to tell you everything I could, but now you need to decide what to do next. I can't promise safety, only that I'll be here with you whatever happens. But you have to be ready." My mind raced, the suspense unbearable, the stakes higher than ever. I realized that even when the truth is revealed, life can still be unpredictable, secrets can still exist, and love can still demand impossible courage. I swallowed hard, taking in the weight of everything. The hidden marriage, the secret life, the protection, and now the unseen threat that had entered my world. I knew the climax had arrived, that the conflicts had reached their peak, but the final twist left me breathless, standing at the edge of uncertainty. And in that moment, I understood something crucial. Even when answers are revealed, the story isn't just about the past. It's about the choices we make next, the courage to face the unknown, and the strength to confront whatever comes. I looked up at him, heart pounding, knowing that the story, my story, had reached its most intense moment. The suspense, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they had all led to this point. And as we sat there, facing the uncertainty together, I realized that the most important truth wasn't just about him or the secrets or the danger. It was about us. About resilience, about confronting the unknown with courage, and about understanding that even love, when tested to its limits, can still survive, if we're willing to fight for it. I sat there, holding the photograph, my mind racing yet slowly beginning to clear. The weight of the past weeks, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the hidden truths, had finally reached an equilibrium. The tension, once unbearable, now felt like a quiet hum in the background, a reminder of the journey I had endured. It wasn't easy to process everything. There were still questions lingering, but now they were tempered with understanding rather than despair. We talked for hours, the kind of conversation that felt both terrifying and necessary. He answered questions I had been too afraid to ask, shared details of his secret life that explained the choices he had made, and for the first time, I felt the full scope of his honesty. There were confessions, yes, but also explanations that gave context to actions that had once seemed incomprehensible. Every layer of deception I had imagined dissolved under the light of truth, leaving only the raw, complicated human story beneath. I realized that the biggest lesson wasn't about him, or about betrayal, or even about love. It was about trust, and about the courage it takes to face the unknown. Life, I understood, was rarely simple. People make choices for reasons we may never fully grasp, and sometimes love comes with shadows that can't be ignored. But confronting those shadows, asking the hard questions, and seeking the truth, those were the acts that defined resilience and growth. We began to piece together the puzzle of the past weeks. The photograph, the hidden life, the secret threats, they all made sense in a way they hadn't before. I understood why he had done what he did, and in that understanding, my anger softened. It didn't disappear entirely, but it became part of a larger picture, one in which mistakes were human, intentions were complicated, and forgiveness was possible. The suspense that had gripped my heart for so long began to ease, replaced by a cautious hope. Over the following days, I started reclaiming my life. I visited the places I loved, spent time with friends who had supported me through the uncertainty, and reflected on everything that had happened. The heartbreak, the suspense, the hidden truths, they had all shaped me in ways I hadn't expected. I was stronger, more aware, and more resilient. The story wasn't just about someone else's choices anymore. It was about how I chose to respond, how I chose to move forward, and how I chose to find peace amid chaos. There were moments of quiet reflection, moments where I still thought of him, of what we had shared, and of the life that had almost been. The memories were bittersweet, a mix of joy and pain, but they no longer carried the weight of betrayal. Instead, they reminded me that even in heartbreak, there is clarity to be found, lessons to be learned, and growth to be embraced. I began to understand that love, even when complicated or painful, leaves a mark that shapes who we are. I also took time to examine the other connections in my life, the friends who had offered support, the family members who had noticed my pain, and even strangers whose small acts of kindness reminded me that the world was not only about heartbreak. These moments, subtle yet profound, grounded me and helped me see that even when one story reaches its end, life continues with new chapters waiting to be written. The suspense of the unknown had taught me that patience and observation can reveal truths we might otherwise miss. In the weeks that followed, I reconnected with him cautiously, carefully navigating the space between past pain and potential reconciliation. We spoke openly, honestly, and without pretense. The tension that had once defined our interactions shifted to something steadier, a sense of understanding and mutual respect. I realized that the climax of our story, the confrontation, the secrets revealed, the near destruction of trust, had also been the catalyst for a deeper connection. We could never erase the past, but we could learn from it, and in doing so, create a more honest, grounded future. I also began to reflect on the suspense that had carried me through the entire ordeal. The uncertainty, the twists, the heartbreak. They had forced me to confront parts of myself I might never have faced otherwise. I learned that suspense is not just a narrative device, it's a reflection of life itself, where unknowns, risks, and hidden truths shape our choices and our growth. The story had taught me to embrace uncertainty, to seek clarity without fear, and to recognize that love is rarely simple, but always transformative. The final piece, the unexpected twist, the photograph that revealed someone had been watching me, served as a reminder that life's mysteries don't always end neatly. Even as we resolve one conflict, others may appear, testing our resilience and our courage. But this time, I approached it differently. I no longer felt helpless or trapped. I understood that the key was not controlling every outcome, but navigating each challenge with awareness, patience, and honesty. The suspense remained, yes, but it was no longer terrifying. It was a catalyst for growth, a challenge to be met with strength rather than fear. As I looked back on everything, I realized that the journey had been as much about me as it had been about him. The heartbreak had forced me to confront my own emotions. The twists had pushed me to question assumptions, and the climax had shown me the power of truth, even when it is complicated. I emerged from it changed, stronger, wiser, and more capable of understanding both love and human complexity. In the end, I learned that life is unpredictable, that love can be both joyful and painful, and that the key to moving forward is embracing honesty, facing suspense with courage, and understanding that growth often comes through struggle. The story resolved not because everything was perfect or simple, but because I had found clarity, resilience, and perspective. I could carry forward, not as someone broken, but as someone shaped by experience, ready for the next chapter, whatever it might hold. I walked away from that cafe, the photograph tucked away, a symbol of lessons learned and challenges overcome. The tension that had once held me captive now felt like a thread connecting past to future, a reminder that every twist, every heartbreak, every revelation is part of the journey. And even though the final twist had reminded me that life holds mysteries we cannot fully predict, I felt ready, strong, aware, and open to whatever came next. The story had reached its natural conclusion, and yet its impact lingered. The suspense, the heartbreak, the twists, they had all shaped me. And as I looked ahead, I knew that the lessons I had learned, the courage I had found, and the clarity I had gained would guide me through every new challenge, every new chapter of life, and every new story that awaited. The past had taught me, the climax had tested me, and the resolution had strengthened me. And with that, I stepped forward, ready to face whatever the world had in store.